Hello, my name is John Laffey. I'm the Technical Manager and Program Director of the Information Security Program for Perry Johnson Registrars. I'd like to thank you all for joining me today. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about scoping your Information Security Management System, or ISMS, which is how I will refer to it for the remainder of the presentation because there is too many syllables, to be quite honest. So it is 11:01 and we will go ahead and get started. Just a few notes here. All participants have been muted, but feel free to use the questions box there in the GoToWebinar app. Throughout the presentation, at the end, I will work through and try and answer as many of those as I can. Additionally, there will be copies of today's presentation available for download shortly after the conclusion, and this webinar will also be available for viewing on our website under previously recorded webinars if you want to revisit anything. Today we're going to be talking about, I'll give a very brief overview of the standard and talk about the purpose of defining the scope. We're going to talk about who and what to consider during that process, as well as some strategies for helping to determine and define the scope and the boundaries of the scope of your ISMS. And we're also going to talk about scoping for success, which really is going to be more about the potential benefits and potential pitfalls of narrowing your scope. And then again at the end, as time allows, I will try and answer as many questions as I can. So a brief overview of the standard. ISO 27001, the current published revision is 2013. It's a standard provided by the International Organization for Standardization, or ISO, which they actually took that from the Greek word meaning equals. That provides a framework for the planning, implementation, and continual improvement of an information security management system. For any of those of you who are familiar with other ISO standards, they've been aligning as much as they can over the most recent revisions of many of the standards, the numbered clauses, so that you know, the elements that are common to any of their management systems are numbered the same way. One of the unique things to the ISO 27001 standard is that it contains an annex that has several control objectives and controls that must be evaluated and considered when you are preparing your risk treatment plan. So it's not prescriptive in saying how exactly those must be carried out, but it does require that you go through each of those controls and determine if it could be applicable to your ISMS and your situation in helping to reduce risks. And it's an internationally recognized standard in information security. Its purpose is to serve assurance to customers and to partners that you know, their information is in good hands with your company, and it can also provide a great benefit in reducing the amount of audits and questionnaires that need to be filled out. I know that's becoming a lot more commonplace these days, where you know, companies are doing a pretty thorough vetting of those that they wish to partner with, and first-hand experience being at customer sites, I've heard on many occasions that it's reduced that amount of work that has to go into that by a large amount by becoming certified, as that will suffice in many situations. So the purpose of the formal scope definition in ISO 27001, it's to state exactly what it is that the organization does that is certified to be effectively controlled by all the requirements of the standard. So in a given organization that, you know, it could provide several different services or products, you know, if all of those and the supporting functions related to those are going to be in the scope, then you would list all of those. But if it was to be narrowed down, then obviously this is the opportunity where you can state that and set the expectation. Without a formal scope definition, you know, being ISO 27001 certified doesn't really mean much of anything, or it could mean a lot. That's just the problem. It doesn't do anything to you know, set the framework of what the expectation should be for information security without stating specifically what's covered. The scope statement should be succinct and precise. You know, as you're going through this process, I know a lot of times I've seen organizations kind of get a little long-winded and use kind of some marketing terms or hyperbolize a little bit, but for the certification purposes, we really like to see a succinct as possible scope statement that really focuses on what it is that your organization does that's being certified to the standard. A bad example would be this fictitious XYZ company's information security system. That doesn't tell us anything. You know, is it for a single piece of paper? Is it for one computer? Is it for a global network of interconnected systems? It doesn't really do any justice to shining light on what exactly is being covered there. A better example, again, fictional company, would be the development, operation, and administration of the scheduling and planning software as a service platform provided by company XYZ. This scope statement tells us that this fictional organization has been certified not just the operation and administration of its platform, but also the development. So now some expectations can be set, and not just for the customers, but as a certification body and as an auditor myself, for the auditor as well. We need to know exactly what it is that's subject to the requirements of the standard so we can audit it effectively. This also means that the people and information systems associated with the development, operation, and administration of the system are in scope. So it also paints a picture for all the associated assets or information assets, as I refer to them, and physical locations as well. We'll get more into that though in a few more slides here. In the event this fictional company also provided other services such as consulting, there should be no confusion or assumption that this separate service meets the requirements of the standard, as it is not documented in the formal scope and wouldn't have been subject to the certification audit. All right. As far as determining your scope, the standard itself contains some language that talks about identifying, you know, the interested parties in your organization, as well as understanding your organization and its context, which is basically just all the specific details that are unique to exactly what it is your company does. You know, and of note here, and this is also called out in the standard, any legal or regulatory requirements that your organization is subject to should certainly be taken into consideration when determining the scope of your ISMS. As an example, if your company provides financial consulting, it would make sense to ensure that the people, processes, systems, and information involved with your client's data is in scope. It also makes sense to ensure that your company is not in any violation of any laws or regulations specific to financial consulting or to the countries, states, localities, etc. that you operate your business within. Conversely, it would not make sense for the same business to have a scope that only includes their sales department, who in this fictitious case, let's say, do not have access to or influence on any of the customer data or its security. You know, so basically what the standard wants you to do, and it's probably common sense, they want to make sure that the information, the people, processes, systems that you have determined to be in scope are going to be those things that you know, your customers care about most, stakeholders, ownership. You know, it should be the core of your business and where the biggest information security threats lie that you're wishing to address. Obviously, it seems like it would go without saying, but I'm sure you can imagine situations where after going through the process of determining how much time, effort, resources would be needed to get the system implemented, some folks have decided to try and kind of sidestep that by limiting the scope to something that's really not that relevant to what it is their organization does on a whole. So in short, you want to be sure you're meeting the requirements and or wishes of those who have the most influence on the ability to reach the organization's goals. Some strategies for determining and defining the boundaries of your ISMS. After considering the details and parties most relevant to your organization and its goals, you should have a good idea of what information they would expect to be within the scope of your ISMS. Now, to determine the boundaries, which can be thought of as a perimeter serving as a demarcation point between a trusted controlled environment and the outside world. For those of you who are familiar with networking, kind of the concept of a firewall with the trusted connections on one side that you have visibility and control and management of, and then the public internet connections on the untrusted side, where you no longer have that authority to be able to govern what goes on. In many cases, the easiest and safest way to determine your boundaries is to include the whole organization. All of its people, processes, systems, and physical locations would be included. For smaller organizations with a single office or those only offering one product or service, it will most likely be less resource intensive to take this approach. The reason being is that if you do limit your scope in terms of your ISMS, anyone or thing, systems, people, processes, information that is not within your scope has to be treated the same as a third party or completely untrusted, and so you could end up putting yourself in a situation where with the shared office, if 4 employees are in scope and 20 are out of scope, you're looking at having separate physical controls possibly in place to limit physical access to certain locations. You could introduce a lot of complexities as far as the systems that are being used, information systems. If they're shared, there's going to have to be levels and layers of segregation and protection baked in. And within your own organization, sometimes it can be more of a hassle than it's worth, honestly. Again, too, in this situation, the way I look at it is I don't think you're going to put yourself at a disadvantage by having everybody in your organization aware of information security and practicing, best practices and adhering to the policies which you implement as part of your ISMS. Again, determining the physical perimeters for your locations in this case is also going to be a lot simpler than trying to section off, a shared office at this point of all of an organization's employees. And I think the tricky part now with scoping in ISO 27001 comes down to the logical what I call the logical boundaries, which is where you're actually talking about your data network. The reason being is it's a lot easier for networks to kind of cross geographical organizational boundaries as opposed to things that are a little bit more tangible. So determining the logical boundaries for your data network can be aided by identifying where the demarcation points for entry and exit exist. This would be in terms of the data network, or where your organization has control and visibility of the network and where it does not. Now, for organizations that have decided that they wish to limit the scope of their ISMS, which is to say they wish to exclude some parts of their organization, here are some strategies that may be of help. If it exists, an organizational chart may easily identify the departments or people that are involved with whatever the specific products or services that have been determined to be in scope. However, again, if there are individuals that are out of scope but occupy the same offices or buildings, they will have to be treated the same as any other person outside of scope or outside the organization, if you will, and controlled as such. Again, this could include separate physical areas secured to only allow in-scope personnel to have access to it, separate information systems, or even having to have contracts in place with other organizational units. So, you're now having to draft up contracts within your own company between business units to define and enforce what the information security related requirements and expectations are. And that's not to say that, you know, it can't be done. In many cases, it could possibly be the best solution. I just kind of wanted to paint the picture of the kinds of things that would be involved with this. Any physical locations where in-scope personnel work from or that are involved with the data and systems used for the in-scope products or services will need to be included in the scope. I will make a note about this because I know a lot of organizations today are utilizing hosted environments for a lot of their computing, whether it be Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, or probably any other of the numerous services that are available online. In most cases, these large organizations, they're going to be able to provide, if not ISO 27001 certification attestation documentation, SOC 2 audit reports and things of that nature. But typically what I see as an auditor, what I've been prone to accept are the contractual terms that are in place for these services. They typically will cover information security, and for the most part, I mean, it obviously depends on exactly what it's being used for, but for the most part, this is sufficient. And to be quite honest, it wouldn't be feasible for me to try and determine which data centers, let's say for an Amazon Web Service hosted environment, which data centers at any given time your environment's operating in physically to actually do an on-site audit. So I'm kind of looking forward to the next revision of the standard to see if they write in anything that's going to address that a little bit more specifically, because it's become so prevalent. But you know, I'm sure a lot of you might have had questions about that. And again, what I see typically is going to be contracts and contractual terms are in place to mitigate whatever the risks associated with that third-party provided service may be. All right, for determining the logical boundaries of a limited scope, you know, a strategy that has occurred to me that I think could be very helpful would be to kind of create a high-level data flow chart that will show a logical mapping of the associated data. So the scenario would be, you know, that you know, the certain types of data that you're concerned with securing, the in-scope data, but you're not sure exactly which physical locations, which people, which organizational units, you know, have access to it or are touching it and would need to be brought into scope. So if you kind of make a high-level data flow starting with where this information that you're concerned with comes from, whether it's internally generated, whether it's customer provided, whether it's a mix of both, you know, you identify all those manifestation points, and then walk through all the potential places it could go to either be archived, stored, processed, etc. And then all the potential exit points. And at this point, I would say, you know, depending on how many servers and things you have, it may be best just to have a block that says database servers or archive servers. And once you have your map, what you can do is go back through and drill back down and then actually enumerate all of those unique servers or instances of those resources and then obviously in your mind you would have to be thinking about where they're at, how they're connected, the types of transport in between them, etc., that are in place to kind of work backwards from the data to ensure that you're putting the correct physical locations, people, processes within the scope of the system. It's obviously not the only method. It's just one that, in my mind, you know, makes sense to me, and I think does a good job of ensuring that nothing's being missed. You know, if you follow the data, the idea is that it will reveal all of those associated things. All right, now, and we've touched on it quite a bit in the previous slides, but the potential benefits and pitfalls of narrowing your scope. Narrowing the scope of your ISMS can reduce its initial cost in resources, time, people, or potentially increase it. I would say being able to roll out the ISMS at a single location can certainly be much less daunting than implementing at multiple at the same time. But again, due to the ease with which data networks can cross organizational and geographical boundaries, it may not always be realistic. Obviously, it's really going to depend on your organization's specific situation and what it is that you do. But that logical kind of boundary definition, I think, is the one that you really have to take a hard look at to see if it's actually going to be feasible to limit the scope how you wanted to initially. And I always go back to determining what it is that your organization does that would have the greatest benefit to your interested parties by being controlled by a ISO 27001 certified ISMS, and then working outward from there to identify all the associated resources with that. Again, I would hate to, not hate, but I just don't think it would be the greatest benefit to a company to kind of constrict their scope in such a way to make it fit for a smaller number of its employees or number of its systems, if at the end of the day it's not really going to provide the benefit that your customers and those other interested parties would most like to see. And again, the feasibility and sensibility of limiting the scope is going to depend on the specific details of your organization. But again, with a limited scope, those organizational assets outside the scope must be treated the same as those external to your company. So it can, on the surface, while it may seem to be saving some time and effort, it can actually increase the total time and effort that would be required in order to control those threats from within your company that are outside of the scope. Oh, wow. All right, well, I guess I did some fast talking. I apologize here. This is my first webinar that I've given. So let's see. It looks like we got some questions here. How about the boundaries in the scope? And that looks like it was from Playman. Playman, I'm sorry, I don't know if I did manage to answer your question or not, or if you can provide any further details. I'm not sure exactly what it is you're asking there. If you're still here and you want to submit a follow-up question with some more details, I can hopefully get you what you're looking for. And if anybody else has questions, because right now that's the only one that I am seeing on my list, and we certainly have time, please feel free. I'd like to make this as beneficial for everybody as possible. And oh, somebody's hand went up. It's gone. Again, in the GoToWebinar applet, there is a questions drop-down box, which is where I am currently monitoring for any questions. I also have the chat box open, so feel free. I'd love to be able to spend some more time here and maybe answer some specific questions that you have. And if it's about scope, great. If it's about something else, ISO 27001 related, feel free to ask that as well. We'll wait just a few more minutes here, and if we don't have any takers, then it will just be short and sweet today. I will be doing more of these on various topics, ISO 27001 related. Right now the schedule is showing, it looks like every 2 months there'll be a new one going up. So if you also have any suggestions for any topics you'd like to see covered in upcoming presentations or questions that I can answer now, please feel free. Oh, here we go. When auditing and there is a requirement from a customer and not in the scope, how would you find that trail? Matthew. Great question, Matthew. So as far as, I just want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. There's a requirement from the customer, but it's not in the scope. So this given company has a scope that covers one thing. Apparently, they're also providing goods or services that are not in their scope, and this customer requirement is kind of crossing the boundary there. You know, I guess because it's not so cut and dry, it would depend on what the specific requirement was, what the company did, and what their scope was. But if even part of the customer requirement would fall into the scope of the company's ISMS, I would follow the trail as far as I could to make sure that whatever portion of this requirement that could be in scope, you know, is being met, and then wherever the interface is to where it goes outside of the scope, if there's any related risks that have been identified, or perhaps this would raise the flag of maybe one that hadn't, that it had at least been considered and treated to whatever the organization's you know, acceptable level of risk is. And I know that's a bit of a vague answer, but I guess that's kind of all I can do with you know, not having more specific details. I hope that helped answer your question. Feel free to let me know if it didn't. If you have more follow-up, I'd be happy to try and help more. When auditing to the 27001 standard, would you look at customer purchase orders for any other info? Forgive me, Matthew, but I guess that's where I was going to find a trail. Well, again, I apologize, Matthew. In a vacuum, I'm not sure I completely understand, you know, what would be on this purchase order that would have kind of raised this concern. Again, I don't mean to cop out, but without knowing more specifically exactly what the situation was, it's impossible for me to answer. Contract. Yeah, contractual requirements are absolutely a requirement of the standard as far as ensuring that you're meeting your contractual requirements. So again, the contract was in place for something that was covered by the scope and maybe kind of cross boundaries. Maybe there's additional products or services that are tacked on that were outside of scope. You know, it's still a contractual requirement. I would think that whatever led me to see it in the first place would be the same set of circumstances that would lead me to do some further investigation as to determine if some of these contractual requirements weren't being met. No problem, Matt. As you wrote here, I know it's a little vague, just thinking as an auditor. Yeah, you know, it's hard to talk in generalities a lot because so much is going to be determined by the devils and the details of the specific client and system, but hopefully I was able to give you a little insight there as far as how I would handle it. Obviously every auditor has their own methods and styles, but that, given the information that I have, that is how I would handle it. No problem. My pleasure. Thanks for coming and checking it out. Anybody else have any questions, comments, suggestions for upcoming topics? Any feedback at all? Thank you, John. Thanks for attending. Appreciate the feedback. Sorry, John, I don't know if something got lost in translation. I see another question here that you posted that says, if I have a follow-up question. I'm thinking perhaps part of that got cut off. Oh, you know what? Let me go ahead. I'm going to just put my contact information here, my email address. If you have any further follow-up questions or comments, please feel free to email me. I just added my email address to the slide that should be shown on everybody's screen there. It is jlaffey@pjr.com, and I would be happy to help you out. My pleasure, John. All right, guys. Well, looks like that's going to wrap it up for today. Again, thank you very much for attending. And, if anything strikes you after we walk away here, if later on in the day, week, month, if you have any questions, comments, just want to chat about ISO 27001, please feel free to shoot me an email. Again, that's jlaffey, L-A-F-F-E-Y, @pjr.com. Thanks a lot. I hope everyone has a great day.